every candidate will receive 1 minute and 30 seconds to respond to every question, but the first candidate who's asked will also have a 30-second rejoinder to the other candidates, and each candidate will have that opportunity twice. I promise we'll be keeping track of all of this, so we'll just go ahead and get straight to it. Oh, by the way, before we start, I will say, I probably speak for everybody in this room when I say it's pretty exciting to have such a robust group of candidates on the Democratic side. It's been a while since the Democrats have had a real contested primary, and that's pretty exciting. Okay, so for the first question, we are going to start with Jack, and then Laura, you will respond, and then we'll go on down. But you guys have a list in front of you. So, CanCare has been plagued by problems since its inception, from a huge backlog of unprocessed Medicaid applications to the clunky rollout of the Kansas eligibility enforcement system. And audits have also demonstrated that state oversight of foster care contractors has been too relaxed. So, with those things in mind, what role should privatization have in state government?
I think these events within the Brownback administration and previous experiments with privatization in the federal government have shown that it is a disaster, and it truly means that public services are for profit, and we cannot allow that. We need to bring back under public control health care, child care, and all these things that used to be that were run by the state. They weren't perfect when they were run by the state, far from it, but there was at least the goal of the common good, and these are our children, and let's take care of them. But then when you give it to a private company, they're thinking about profit. They're like, how do we make an extra dime? And so we really have to think about that. We really do have to bring them back under public control and create robust requirements and robust plans to make sure that we do have a functioning Medicaid system and a functioning foster care system, and to make it even better than it was. It needs to be way better than it was, and I think that's why we tried the experiment of privatization. But we cannot allow this experiment to go on any longer, and we must make sure that public agencies in Kansas work for the people of Kansas.
Thank you. Laura.
I'm not universally opposed to privatization, but it has to be done right. And I can tell you that it is not possible to do it right when you're talking about a public health system or health insurance system. So one of the things I plan to do when I am governor is when time allows, after the contracts are expired, if we find out that we can move out of them, we will be transitioning back to a quasi-governmental, nonprofit structure, much like we had with the Kansas Health Policy Authority several years ago, where we put all of our state health insurance programs under that umbrella. We will be able then to control our costs, we'll be able to control accountability, and we'll be able to ensure that Kansans get the services that they need and are entitled to.
Thank you. Josh.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out. It's really hot. It's the day after the 4th of July, so all of us are sort of recovering off of that. I also have to open with kind of an amusement. They have the Ramada Wi-Fi password up here for all of us, and I'm wondering if that's like a phone-a-friend crisis. If we suddenly don't know an answer and you see us frantically up here on our phones, we can take advantage of the Wi-Fi. But really, I appreciate you coming out. This is an important election cycle. It's very important that you understand about each of us and what we believe in and our vision for the future of the state. And I certainly take that to heart when we talk about CanCare or any sort of privatized system in the state. There are areas of our state government that work well privatized. I used to run the Department of Agriculture. Before I got there, they actually took the grain inspection portion, which had been in the state, privatized it. That office is just north of the Kansas River here in Topeka. Works great. No problems at all. But there are also areas of state government that do not function well when they are privatized, and I think we are living that out day to day with CanCare. There are just places that a for-profit motive does not work. We are losing children, and millions of dollars are moving out of the state and into other states. I think the next governor needs to tear down the CanCare system, rebuild it with programs that are largely in the state, and we find out how to deliver services to people better than they are right now, because they are not being served.
Carl.
Well, again, thank you for hosting this today, and as you know, that's something that I'm very passionate about. There are some areas that we can actually privatize here in the state of Kansas, but there are some areas that we should never ever privatize them. If it has to do with our children, or if it has to do with our seniors, or it has to do with our health care, it should not be privatized in any way, because that's a business. And their job is to be able to make a profit. And so, oddly enough, currently right now we're having issues with various different services where we have privatized it, and we can't account for the number of children and where they're at. We can't account for the health care of certain individuals. Those types of things, under my administration, we're going to be bringing back inside, and we're going to turn around and make sure that we hire the right people, and there's careful oversight over those individuals. Our children are our most prized possession, and in the state of Kansas, there's no reason that we should have 73 children out there and we have no idea where they're at. Each one of them is my child, and each one of them is your child.
Thank you. Art.
Privatization only works really in the private sector. And the problem that we have with CanCare today is that none of the people sitting up here other than myself actually have seen a patient. I saw patients this morning before I came here, and several of them were Medicaid patients. I've had to work with Medicaid for a number of years. I actually know what the issues are and how we actually need to fix the system. It doesn't work with the current system. We spend $8,700 per person in the state of Kansas. Australia spends $4,300, but we don't even have to go out of country. Louisiana only spends $5,900. So just compared to Louisiana, where's that other $30,000 or $3,000 going to? The other thing is the prison system. That doesn't work to be privatized either. We have a 67% recidivism. I take care of a number of the guards that work at the Lansing prison system, and I've taken care of some of the inmates as well. I know these things from a firsthand experiential perspective. And as far as the foster care system for the children, you can't privatize that, because then what happens is people are given free rein to be prejudicial. And that's a human rights issue. We need to stop that, and the only way that we're going to stop that is we have to bring those kinds of services back under public scrutiny and purview.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Jack, do you have any response to what you just heard?
I think everyone made very clear points.
Okay, moving on. This question is for Carl. I mean, it's for everybody, but we're starting with Carl.
I understand.
So the Supreme Court recently ruled that education funding in Kansas remains inadequate. What needs to happen with school finance, and where will the money come from?
Well, certainly, there's no doubt that our education system has been underfunded for quite some time. And that was one of the first areas that they actually started cutting. But we need to make sure that our children get the best education. I've continuously said that our children are not just competing with the border states or with anyone else in the United States. We need to prepare our children to go compete with the rest of the world, to be able to have the same quality of life that each and every one of us are enjoying. And so to do that, one, we have to invest in education. We have to believe in it. We have to move it, reprioritize it, and move it up. We say if we want to grow our economies, we must grow. We must have a skilled workforce. We must have an educated workforce. Well, it starts in K through 12 and even going on to the other higher educations in college degrees and trade schools. So under my administration, I will make sure that that's a priority, and it will be made a number one priority, because they will go hand in hand when we're talking about growing our economy, or we're talking about growing the state of Kansas, or we're talking about trade. That would be one of those things that would be equally important. And under my administration, we'll do that, and we're going to do it and work aggressively. As we diversify our economy, we start educating small businesses on export, and we start helping rural Kansas to be able to grow and come up with different types of industries.
Thank you so much. Josh, we're going to jump to you and then to Senator Kelly.
Sure. Three things. One, I think the state probably, the legislature this last session probably did as well as it could, mostly because the state doesn't have the money. And then two, all the other state agencies have been so grossly starved over the last 8 years that moving forward, it's going to take some balance over the next few years. Where the money comes from in the future, because I certainly would agree that we have underfunded K through 12 greater than simply the $525 million that we've put back in. The economy's got to keep improving, and I think it will continue to do that. I can't overstate how important the ag and oil and gas sectors are to the state's revenues. Oil and gas is now back up to $70 a barrel. we'll start seeing the benefit from that. We've seen reports that we're seeing the benefits from the tax increase that's passed this last session as well. So we'll see those benefits come through in terms of what we can offer schools. Two, I think it's critically important that this state improve the pipeline of young people that want to enter teaching as a profession. And that's in part the salary that we pay them, but it's also a lack of due process that's been removed in the last 8 years, and this lack of respect from the administration. And then finally, we have to get the legislature back to passing their budget by the end of March and then cleaning everything up by the omnibus, because when the legislature doesn't do everything until the omnibus, and that comes at the end of May or end of June, it hamstrings what school districts can do in terms of the positions that they file open and request for applications. And it leaves them no time to plan for what they want to do in the next fiscal year. The state should fix that.
Thank you.
Yeah, clearly, there's no doubt that we've been underfunding our schools for a long time. We had an opportunity as we were coming out of the recession to restore our funding to our schools. Instead, we were offered the Brownback-Collier tax experiment, which really decimated our budget and therefore decimated our schools. We have actually put about $800 million into schools over the past couple of years. The court has said a nice start, but what you needed to include in that was the rate of inflation. So next year we've got to go back and deal with that, and we will. And there is money in the kitty for us to take care of that particular issue. Going forward, we need to take a comprehensive look at our education system, because it's not just our K-12 system that needs to be more robustly funded. We also need to invest heavily in early childhood education. That's where we get the best bang for our buck and actually save money in the long run, because those kids end up not needing special education and not needing incarceration. And then we also know that we need to make some very substantial investments in our community colleges and tech ed, so that kids who are not interested in going on to a four-year degree have an opportunity to earn a certificate and a good living when they get out of our tech schools. So we've got a lot of work to do. We'll work with our businesses, try to create public-private partnerships to help us take care of it, because they have a big investment in whether or not we have a quality school system from early childhood through our workforce.
Thank you.
There's always an issue that comes up year after year, doesn't matter what state you're in, as far as how is our funding going for the state's programs, which include education and other social services and so on. Education really is the foundation. It's the most important thing that we can do for the future. It's the most important thing that we can do for the economy. And I've repeatedly said the best jobs bill is the best education bill. We have to fund education sufficiently, but what does that mean? What it means is we need to get more money into the classroom. If we look back into the 80s, my understanding is from the teachers that taught back then, we were spending between 60 and 65 cents out of every dollar in the classroom. Today it's down to about 53 cents. And so it's a matter of where is that money going? And the problem we have is that teachers are having to buy their own supplies. We have books that are way outdated, and so kids are not engaged, particularly if you're an English lit teacher. As well, they need paraprofessionals. And the problem with not having enough paraprofessionals, the teachers then can't teach because they're having to take care of just other things, discipline and various issues along that line. So we have to be able to take care of that. Where are we going to get the money? That's always the question that comes up as well. Where are we going to get it? We're going to have to look at other revenue ways of getting things in without raising tax on food, without having to raise property taxes, because that doesn't work for local and small economies and areas.
Thank you. Thank you. Jack?
Alrighty, there are many things that we need to look at when we make sure that we need to make sure our schools are funded so that we make sure our children get the best education and are ready for this modern workforce. Well, one of the first things we need to do is we need to look at having a tax structure that really does tax the rich and taxes the big corporations adequately. We have to make sure Kansas is a place of entrepreneurship, but also to make sure that those who are making a lot more pay more so that we can afford to give our children a good education. We can also look into what Colorado has done and legalize marijuana and use the funds that will come from that tax stream, use that towards education. It's wildly successful. Their schools are almost, in terms of other states, their schools are having a lot more money to come in than other states. So we really need to look at those two things. And also, along with legalizing marijuana, you will also spend less money in incarceration and on patrol, so you're able to save some money there, and that money can also go into education. And then also, with that, we need to make sure that we do raise teacher pay to be on par with other states, because we're losing a lot of teachers to states like Minnesota and Illinois that are paying, or Colorado, that are paying about, at least 2 times what Kansas is paying on average. So we have to make sure we're keeping those people in Kansas and recruiting teachers to come to Kansas. So not only do we have the adequate supplies and buildings, we also have the people who are ready to take our children into the 21st century.
Thanks, Jack. Mayor Brewer, do you have a response to any of the other candidates?
Yeah, well, what I would say is, Dr. Arneson said is absolutely correct. But to take it one step farther, we've got to start thinking much larger than just trying to go from hand to mouth here in the state of Kansas. And that is, they paid the bare minimum of what it was needed for education. An independent group said we needed $1.7 to $2 billion for education. That would have just broke us even at the very bottom. There was no strategy, no plan as to what they were going to actually do for the future, for the next 5 to 10 years, as far as paying for the children's education and also providing additional funding for teachers' raises.
Thank you. Thanks. And the responses are only 30 seconds, by the way. Just something to bear in mind. Okay.
She didn't raise her hand up fast.
Yeah. So we're going to move on to Josh for this one. What redistricting challenges do you expect in 2020, and how will you address them?
First of all, for redistricting, we need to make sure as the state of Kansas that every person counts, and that is true statewide. And so I would encourage any of you, if you are engaged in these activities, be talking in your community right now. People need to know that the census is important, and it's important that we know exactly how many people live in each of those districts, particularly in Southwest Kansas, where a lot of people do not want to be counted, but it matters, and it's important. Now, to the question of how redistricting matters in politics, I will remind all of you, in 2012, the legislature was incapable of redrawing the lines, and so the court eventually took it over. The court drew lines, basically divorced from politics. And I would argue we ended up with the most conservative legislature we've had in years after those lines were drawn by a court that did not use politics to draw it. So if you think that removing politics from the drawing of lines will make it better, I encourage all of you, particularly those of you that are Democrats, what matters is getting people out to run for those offices. Because as a Democrat, what happened was that we had all these brand new lines drawn. Well, no, there were Democrats not even filing in a lot of those seats, and so really conservative people ended up winning in districts that were probably winnable for Democrats. So if the party is not active statewide, then we end up in a scenario, regardless of what the lines look like, where Democrats aren't winning when we actually could. So let's fix the party first and worry about the lines later.
Thank you, Jack.
I think what Josh has argued correct. We do have to have a robust state party, and I think we're getting closer to that. We're kind of coming out of the dark age. But one thing we do have to look at is we do have to make sure that lines, right now you're saying, he's saying, we don't necessarily want to remove politics from it. I think it is. Because yes, while the conservative Republicans might have power now, and you might say, let's get them out of it. But even if, let's say, the Democrats were to create good lines, they could all be erased if a Republican were to come in 10 years and have the control while the census was done. So I think what we really have to do is we have to make sure that there's an independent commission that does this and have a legislature. This was done in Iowa fairly recently. We're kind of going to see how this is going to turn out ultimately. But I think it's going to be more efficient in the way it is now. You take the politicians out of drawing the lines, I think you're going to get fairer lines. If it's done by an independent commission that looks at the numbers and will just kind of come up with fair, adequate issues. And I think that's the fair way to do it, to make sure that people will not be gerrymandered out of having a reasonable democracy and being able to vote for representatives and not being segregated into districts based on party and other factors.
Thank you. We're going to jump to Art now, and Carl will be our anchor.
Certainly the redistricting issue comes up periodically, and as Josh said, we've got to get out and get people registered. We've got to be active, and really I think that's the most important thing. We're never really going to take politics out of it. Even if you look at independent councils, somebody appointed them, and if you talk to them, they're registered either a Democrat or a Republican, or maybe a few of them are registered independents, but you're still going to have some type of partisan opinion. And so what we have to do is become active, just like this group here. You're active, you're here participating. We have to do that in all areas, be more active in our government, be more active in the process so that our voices are heard, so that you contact your representatives, you contact those people that have a say in the redistricting. And is it always going to work? No. But it's not always not going to work either by staying home. Certainly, it never works. So we have to be involved as often and as much as we can, get our voices to be heard, and then we have to let the chips fall where they may. And if we don't like it, then next time we have to be even more active and find out where we didn't fix that problem or where we went wrong.
Senator Coe.
Thank you. I actually have a plan for redistricting sitting over in my desk drawer at the state capitol. I haven't introduced it yet because I wanted to wait until I was governor so nobody would veto it. But it is based very much on the Iowa plan. When we were struggling with the courts and having them redraw our lines in 2012, at that same time, I don't think we had our lines drawn until very close to the filing deadline, which created all sorts of havoc across the state. At the same time, Iowa's nonpartisan legislative research department takes their data and they go down into their little basement rooms or wherever they're housed, and they have all this incredible computer equipment. But what they take into consideration are really communities of interest. They don't take into consideration incumbency or partisanship. They just take in trying to keep cities and counties together. So the Legislative Research Department handed their plan to the legislature on Tuesday. On Friday, the governor signed it into law. We need to go to something like that is less controversial, less political, and more fair for all the people in the state of Kansas.
Well, I certainly believe that I've been involved in multiple redistricting plans from the very beginning of my being getting involved in politics. And I've seen an opportunity, I've seen gerrymandering, and I've seen a lot of different things go on. But the best approach that I have ever seen is one, when we allow the citizens, the independent individuals that lived inside that particular area or throughout the entire state and city to be involved in that process. And they drew out the plan, and then they presented it to the policymakers because you gave them the parameters, and that's what they actually did. Now, certainly, as we start looking at the census, it's important for us to start getting more people involved in getting involved in the census. We've got to create an environment where everyone feels comfortable doing it and that they understand the reason why we're actually doing a census. And it's not to get into your personal business, it's not to ship you out of the country. We've got to make everyone understand what importance it is for it. So, under my administration, that's what you'll see. You'll see an independent organization, representatives, citizens like yourself, that will draft the plan. That way we can eliminate a lot of gerrymandering and make it nonpartisan.
Thank you. Josh, you have time for 30 seconds.
I'm certainly a fan of independent commissions. And don't get me wrong, these districts need to be communities of interest. But Democrats, don't fool yourselves. Redrawing the lines is not going to help us because outside of Lawrence, Topeka, Wyandotte County, Northeast Johnson County, and parts of Central County, the rest of the state for Democrats is hard. So you need a candidate that can campaign and win statewide because I don't care how you draw them in Western Kansas, it's going to be all Republican. So it's about candidates that can compete and be present and known by those districts and able to win there. And we don't fix the state until we get there.
Thank you. Okay, this question is, we're going to start with Senator Kelly. Kansas is a state where students can bring guns into classrooms at our universities. And a leading candidate for governor thinks K-12 teachers need to be armed. He also rolls around the state in a Jeep with a fake 50 caliber machine gun fixed to the roof. With these things in mind, how do our state's gun laws need to be changed?
Well, I can tell you I know who you're talking about. And my guess is that he is not aiming his message or his gun at mom and dad and the kids on the curb at these parades. He's going over to talk to very different people. So we have actually made some attempts over the past couple of years to put some common sense back into our gun laws. We went way too far, and we need to come back and make them responsible and sensible. We have voted twice now in the last couple of years to ban guns on campus. We were not successful the first time. The vote was very far apart. This time we came within a tie, 2020. So we're getting close, and I think we have a governor in the office who will actually advocate for it, bring together the folks who have a vested interest in this, law enforcement, educators, public health, mental health folks, and have them work with us to craft a comprehensive gun sense policy. And then I'll use the office of governor to shepherd as much of that through the legislature as we can possibly get. And I do want to give a shout out to Moms Demand Action, because if it hadn't been for them, our gun laws would be in
Basically, I'm a colonel in the U.S. Air Force, and I sit beside a gentleman here who was in the Army, and I can tell you, only a fake wannabe soldier would play games with such devices in a Independence Day parade. Guns in the school do not belong there.
Thank you.
For people who believe that we can just arm teachers, they know nothing about the military. We have soldiers being sent to Afghanistan and Iraq and other places. They're trained to kill, and they cannot always pull the trigger to kill somebody. So to think that we should make our teachers into police officers is ludicrous. It doesn't happen. Teachers are there to teach. We need to secure our schools very much like we have after 9/11. We fly differently today because of 9/11. We need to secure our schools very similarly. If you go to Israel, Israel's been under attack for a long time. You realize that you don't get into any public entrance without going through some kind of security check. Like it or not, we have domestic terrorism today. We have to protect our schools. Arming teachers is not what is going to solve that problem. We also need to keep the guns out of those people with mental illnesses and really don't belong in having a gun. We don't allow that in the military. Why do we allow that in the civilian world?
Thank you.
Well, certainly, one of the things that I have done, I've been 21 years in the military, and I've trained soldiers, infantry soldiers, to go to combat, to fight for this country. And I'm almost pretty sure that the person that's riding around in Jeep can't set the headspace and timing or even clear that weapon that he's actually trying to simulate that he knows something about. But to stay on a positive note, we have no business having guns in schools. I have 13 grandchildren. Teachers are there to teach because they love doing that. Children are there to get an education. We don't need them there focused on what's going to happen or getting prepared. And if a teacher is carrying a weapon, then that's what the kid's going to be focused on, is the weapon and when something is going to happen. So we have to focus on that. Under my administration, there will never, ever be a way that we would put guns in schools with teachers and have them to start policing them, or children have to be fearful of that. Secondly, we would take a very close look at schools, at colleges, and making sure that they don't have weapons in college, because those children they're just kids that have made another level of education, and we have to make sure that they're protected and that they have guns. It's just about bringing good common sense. And I'm not against the Second Amendment because of the fact I'm a hunter and I'm a retired military officer and I enjoy my weapons. But it's about common sense, not stupidity.
All right, I'm going to start off with an unpopular opinion. While I believe that in most cases guns should not be in school except with a security guard, and there are some rural schools where there might be 20 minutes until a cop can get there. In those cases, if a teacher was to have a gun and with approval and with a lot of restraints, they should be able to have that if they feel that that is the only way they will be able to protect their children in times of crisis. But we do need to have a ban on people with diagnosed mental illness from having guns. We do need to have a universal background check to make sure those that should not be having guns are not able to get them, and try to create an interstate compact so we can create a nationwide program so that even if you go down to Oklahoma and try to buy a gun, they will still deny you, because we need to have a nationwide program. Otherwise, people will just jump state lines, and that won't be effective. Also, in order to, I'm not in favor of raising the age in order to buy a gun, but you should have to go through regulation class. You should have to go through training, that's how it used to be in the state. You'd have to go through training, and that's how you get your concealed carry license. Now they just give it to anyone. You have to go through a rigorous training class in order to have your concealed carry under my administration.
All right, thank you, Josh.
So I have 26 members of my family that are or were public school teachers, and I've said this before. My mother-in-law is a retired teacher from Shawnee Mission West. Is the very last person on earth I would want to have a gun in a tight situation. And she would tell you the exact same thing. She is trained to teach. She is not trained to make those life and death decisions in tight situations. But I met with a member of law enforcement this morning. I was shocked to learn the state, requires that when police officers confiscate weapons, usually handguns, they have to sell them back to the public. They are not allowed to destroy them. And it reminded me of just exactly how we got to this position, because I was in the legislature when we passed concealed and carry for the first time. I did it, but we required 8 hours of training, and we required individuals to gain a permit from the state, and some very reasonable restrictions that you would assume would be attached to that. And then after I left the legislature, they rolled most of those back, and she's got 30 seconds after me to rebut this, and that's fine. But Senator Kelly, you did that. You not only voted for them, you co-signed that legislation. And you talk about your experience, you have to know how impossible it is to roll this legislation back now. So you talk about voting it, but once you let it pass in Kansas, it is next to impossible to roll it back. We had sensible gun laws in this state, and they were erased in the past 8 years. And Senator Kelly, you were part and parcel of making that happen.
Thank you, Senator Kelly.
Thank you. You know, I did vote for that and immediately recognized that we had gone way too far and have since voted to repeal it. I think that there is a way. We are getting a much more moderate legislature coming in. Hopefully you'll send us some more. And with a moderate Democrat in the governor's office, we will be able to institute a number of gun sense policies and get them passed.
Thank you. We're going to start with Arden here. Do you think it's likely that a Medicaid expansion bill will make it through the legislature next year? If so, why will this session be any different from previous sessions?
Very good question, and I think it depends upon what goes on here in the fall, and hopefully we're going to have a little bit more of a moderate organization in the legislature. And so I think with that, yes, I think there's a pretty good chance of that happening. And really, though, what we need to look at is, as I said, I'm the only one up here that actually has seen a patient. And so why does Louisiana spend $5,900 per person in Medicaid, and we spend $8,700 in Medicaid? Do you know that if we spent $5,900 in Medicaid right now, we would more than cover 150,000 additional people? If we actually overhauled that system, we would cover 380,000 people by getting it down to what Australia spends, which is about $4,300 per person. The current budget would give us that. Yes, then we definitely need to expand, because we can take that money and keep it here. Because the problem right now is 50% of that money that we're putting in leaves the state of Kansas. We need that money in our economy. It's our money. Federal or not, it's still our money, and we need to keep it here. That is the only way we're really going to turn this over. And that takes a cultural change at the top in order for that process. And you've got to have somebody who's actually seen a patient to understand how you have to change the process.
Thank you, Art. We're going to move on to Mayor Brewer.
Try to make sure I get it in my correct time. You know, what we're actually looking at, as Art said, is I also believe that with what's going on and what's happening today, more Democrats are getting involved. I think the elections are going to change a lot of things, and we'll elect more Democrats this next year. But I think more importantly, you know, I think that we can also get it passed, and we certainly should get it passed, and we should come up with a plan to be able to do that, and how we're going to be able to fund it. But we need to come up with an alternate plan in the event that it does not happen. not just assume it and then just say, oh, well, we thought it was going to, and then we just walk away. We have to come up with an alternate plan and being able to address that issue. With me, that's what we're going to do. We're going to diversify our economy. As you heard Jack talk about the legalization of marijuana and also diversifying what we actually have there. Take those dollars, apply those dollars to health care, apply them to education, apply them to teachers' pay, apply them for mental health. Take those dollars, that additional dollars, but come up with an overall plan and come up with a long-range plan as how we're going to address health care for every single citizen here in the state of Kansas.
Thank you, Jack.
I think ultimately Medicaid expansion will pass as it is passed in the previous legislatures, and likely we will have a more democratic and more moderate legislature, even more moderate, coming in to the 2019 session. So we really have to think about what we want. I think we do have to make sure there are major reforms to make sure we're getting our money for it. But we also have to look at other plans besides just expanding. We can expand that and cover a lot of people. But we also have to look at, I look at something called the Nevada plan, which was passed last year in the Nevada legislature, but vetoed by the Republican governor. What this plan would do is it would allow people who make too much to get Medicaid, but yet cannot afford the private insurance, to buy a public option from the government. This would make sure the most amount of people are insured until the federal government does its job and passes the national health care program like proposed by Senator Sanders.
All right, thank you. Josh.
This is about individuals and their need for health care. It is also about providers, namely the hospitals and senior assisted living facilities that are serving low-income individuals. 87% of the Medicaid dollars in Medicaid expansion into the state would have gone to children and seniors, and it's incumbent upon us as Democratic candidates to make sure that this state understands that, because in the Republican debates, they trot other numbers out and they continue to suggest that these are individuals that simply don't want to work and just want free health care. Even the 13% of the individuals that are not children and seniors, many of them work 30, sometimes 40 hours a week, but it's low-income jobs, it's minimum wage, and they qualify for Medicaid. And we cannot lose sight that this is also about the providers that are providing them service, and frankly, they're already doing it. They're just not being reimbursed, but they're good community citizens, and they want to make sure these people are taken care of. So this is something we should have done a long time ago. These are our tax dollars that we sent off to the federal government, and we should put this program in place for Kansas and for the providers that are providing those services for Kansans.
Senator Kelly.
Not expanding Medicaid when we had our chance was the dumbest thing we have done in the state of Kansas ever. Not only does it mean that 150,000 Kansans are out there without access to health care, not only does it mean that our providers are not getting reimbursed for services and that rural hospitals have been closing or on the brink of it, it also means that we left $2.5 billion and growing every day Kansas taxpayer dollars back in Washington, D.C. They distributed to other states for them to take care of their people and then to grow their economies. Louisiana 2 years ago expanded Medicaid. In the first year, they saw a $317 million savings and 19,000 new good-paying jobs. Kansas has forfeited all of that by our absolute refusal to expand Medicaid because we don't like Obamacare. The nice thing to know is that we did pass Medicaid expansion last year in the legislature, and when I'm your governor, I won't veto it, so we will do that next year.
Just to reiterate further, healthcare is the #1 issue in the United States right now. It is the #1 issue. And so it's not just the Medicaid issue and the lower socioeconomic. Yes, we need to expand that, but we've got to overhaul that. This system is broken. American healthcare spends 2 to 2.5 times anywhere else in the world. We rank 35th out of 195. Australia ranks #2, and they spend only $4,300. We have to overhaul the system, and only a physician, a family physician, who actually sees people, understands what's broken and what needs to be fixed and how to fix it in that system.
Okay, we are at the halfway point, so people will start going quiet. Anyway, we're going to start with Senator Kelly here. how will you support the right of workers to organize both in the private and public sectors and help build public support for improving labor laws in Kansas and the United States?
Excellent question. But before I go to that question, I would just like to point out to Dr. Anderson that I too have seen patients. I spent 12 years working in hospitals, 6 in New York and 6 in Denver. And no, I'm not a physician, but I was an allied health professional. I saw patients on a regular basis. So in terms of supporting labor and labor laws, we have done some serious damage to our labor laws in the state of Kansas. One example I will give you is that we have stripped our state employees of almost all their civil service protections. You know, by not giving our classified employees a raise for 8 to 9 years, we sort of put them in a chokehold, and it made them accept an offer. You want a pittance of a pay raise? Okay, give up your classification, become an unclassified, hire and fire at will. We did that to them, and we need to go back. We need to. There was a reason civil service protections were put into place in the first place, and we need to go back to that. We need to do the same for our teachers in restoring their due process, and we need to work very heavily on our work comp laws, which are unfair to our workers, and the same thing with unemployment.
I agree that the workers' compensation laws in the state of Kansas weren't even great, but they were decent in the 2000s, and in the last 8 years they've been eroded to the point where people honestly ask the question whether or not Kansas actually cares about its workers, in the private sector even, not counting the civil servants. Then as a former Secretary of Agriculture, it was an extraordinary experience for me to be able to run a state agency and see how dedicated the civil servants in that agency were that came to work every single day to make government work better for the citizens around the state. And it's been very sad for me, and frankly one of the reasons that I'm running, to watch that be dismantled over the last 8 years. When we talk about losing children and the problems we're having in the Department of Children and Families, some of it is structural, some of it's a lack of good leadership at the top, but a lot of it is simply when you underfund, when you disrespect, when you move state employees around to the point where they don't even feel like they're worthy there, so they leave, and you can't attract good talent to refill those positions, or you don't refill those positions, guess what happens? You start losing 70 kids in the system. The people that work and make government run every single day matter. And they deserve to have an administration that respects that and tells them that, not only to save the intellectual talent that we have right now, but also attract talent to come back to the state and help put it back together.
Things we can do to make sure that labor is respected in the state of Kansas. I am the only candidate that at least to my knowledge, that has campaigned on raising the minimum wage to a living wage of $15 an hour. That is the lowest wage that someone can make and work 40 hours a week and not be in poverty. No one should work 40 hours a week and be in poverty. That is a crime, and we need to end it. Also, again, on civil servants. On civil servants, I think, yes, we need to make sure that we are paying them a respectable wage for what they're working and give them reasonable wages and working conditions. Otherwise, they will need to go to other states or find a job in the private sector. We need to make sure that our government organizations are run by people who enjoy going to work every day. Also, one other issue about this, one other front of this issue is immigration and immigrants. When a lot of them feel threatened and they feel very marginalized, we need to make sure that we can bring them into the mainstream and have a system so that when immigrants are in this country and in this state, that they feel like, okay, I can go get a job, I can work, and even if they migrated possibly illegally, I don't view that as a right, because I believe people are coming here to work and they want to provide the best for their families. And Kansas, as much as the Republicans, this is the bad thing, I use it as a good thing. Sanctuary state, we need to make sure that we can provide a good home for these people that are looking for a better life, and we can make sure that we can find them jobs and making sure that they will not be in threat of deportation, and making sure that they have the same rights as workers as everybody else.
Well, first of all, there's no secret that I come from corporate America and have seen some of the activity that has went on and have done a lot of business with a lot of corporate businesses. But what I will tell you is that for decades, the focus here has been for union busting. They would like to create environments where there were no labor unions and you had no representation. One, you've got to have someone that has experience in making sure that that does not happen. That cannot happen, because what that says is that each and every one of us is expendable. When they're finished using us, or we're all used up, then they can just discard us. We've got to put things in place that make sure that those types of things don't happen. And not only that, when we start looking at the various different labor issues that are going on, and what you can, when you have back injuries, or neck injuries, or knee injuries, those types of things there, they have created an environment where you can't go back to work, but then there's a cap on how much you can actually receive. We've got to make sure that it's fair and not allow those types of things that are happening. And the only way that can happen is by having real leadership that's willing to stand up and be able to help protect individuals. I worked for, I was an elected official for AFL-CIO Machinists Union and handled state labor laws. And so I've had an opportunity to put up those fights, but I've seen over the years how we continue to lose ground. And we have to make sure that those types of things are protected and that everyone is treated with respect. And not only that, but the individuals that are involved in the LGBTQ community, that their jobs can't be eliminated.
Artie?
The whole labor movement really started a long time ago, and it's waxed and waned over the years. And really it's a human rights issue. And the whole perspective, unfortunately very much in Kansas and a few other states, of being anti-unions, of being anti-labor, really is very much also kind of an anti-human rights process, because it's not just wage, it's also safety in the workplace, safety from sexual harassment, safety from prejudicial decisions, safety from being fired just because, well, we're just going to fire you. And unfortunately what's happened as well is that a number of companies now are forcing overtime rather than hiring more workers. So we're putting people at more risk. For example, in the prison system, people are being put at risk, guards, because they're working so many hours, they're tired, rather than actually hiring more labor. And the reason they don't want to hire more labor, one, there's more strength in that. Number two is because they don't want to have to pay benefits. So we have to have a benefit package understanding or mentality that it's not just the wages, it's also insurance coverage, it's also a retirement program. It's a quality of life that we need, that people can be safe, enjoy their families, and prosper.
Thank you. Senator Kelly, time.
Thank you, yes. What I'd like to add that we haven't really talked about is that the U.S. Supreme Court just passed down a brutal ruling to our unions, not allowing them to collect fees from people who didn't want to join the union but are being represented by the union. We need someone in the governor's office who will shout out to our federal delegation and tell them, when we have an opportunity to choose a Supreme Court justice at this point, our folks need to be there putting him through that litmus test.
Thank you. As the possibility of a trade war with China looms and commodity prices remain low, what should the state government be doing to support our agricultural industries?
Well, what they should be doing is bending over backwards to support our agriculture, and that's one of the things that I have learned, with the tariff wars that are actually going on and trade wars that the president is putting into place. Rural Kansas is very concerned about this issue, and I have seen firsthand when we had this issue going on with aluminum and steel. And so, if we can, our primary foundation is on agriculture and manufacturing, and also property tax. And so, if you destroy one of the three-legged stools that support our economics here in the state of Kansas, then certainly that could very easily put us back into the same position that we're in now. We're having a conversation on how much we're spending for schools. We won't have enough to pay for schools. And so we have to protect that. And so that means, as governor of the state of Kansas, one of the number one priorities that I will be doing is making sure that, one, our federal legislators are fully aware of what this entire economic impact is going to be, but then secondly, how important it is that they need to support us and not their own political agendas. And I will certainly do that, and then when times become difficult, then it's my job and the lieutenant governor's job to go out and beat the bushes and make sure that we can take care of trade ourselves.
Thank you. This is another weird one. I'm going to jump over to Senator Kelly.
I've been stunned by the deafening silence coming out of the governor's office regarding this issue. There has been no communication that I know of back to our congressional delegation to tell them to stand up for Kansans. They're letting all this talk of trade and tariffs go unanswered, and I think we need to hold them accountable for that. The other thing that we're in the process of doing on my campaign now is my lieutenant governor has 30 years experience in the ag banking business, and my campaign treasurer runs an award-winning rural development program over in Allen County. And two of them, along with Patty Clark, who's with the USDA and the Kansas Leadership Center for years, are working together to put together a comprehensive plan for rural development in the state of Kansas. A lot of what we need everywhere will help our rural communities by funding our schools, expanding Medicaid, and funding our infrastructure, getting them the 4-lane highways they need so that they can talk to and try to promote business within their own communities. We need to be doing some of that, but clearly they have some other issues like low-income housing and whatnot that need to be addressed, and we are putting together a comprehensive plan for that, and we will get to work on that as soon as we're in office.
Thanks. Dr. Emerson.
I think we need to have a little bit of understanding of the facts of the matter here, and that is that when I grew up in the 60s in Michigan on a small farm, I heard the same thing from my father, that, oh gee, we're worried about commodity prices and we've got to get more international marketing and so on, and so it really hasn't changed in 50 years. What we've got to do is make Kansas farmers more independent, not dependent on the federal government. And that independence, do you understand that we import 600,000 acres worth of corn into this country because American farmers are not supplying organic corn? Do you understand that we only export 15% of the corn? Only 15%. We need to diversify agriculture. That's number one. Diversify so that we don't get caught by something that the administration decides they want to play games with. Whether it's corn, whether it's soybeans, whether it's sorghum, whether it's cotton, whether it's rice, whether it's sugar, it doesn't matter. We have to make the state agriculture more independent. And that means we've got to bring some training to the table as far as what products. For example, maybe we need to have hemp. Now that's been legalized only partially now. We've got to get it out and actually make it a crop. And there are other products as well that we need to get into agriculture so that we are independent and we have a diversity, and so we're not caught with our pants down when something like the current process occurs.
Thank you. Jack.
Alrighty, I think one of the things we can do is we can try to stress to farmers to provide, what Anderson was saying, try to provide things that the American people want and try to make sure that so that they don't have to export as much to sell their crop and maintain their income. Also, one thing we need to do is we need to legalize hemp, and I think fully, so that this is one of those things that we do anyway. This is really not much to do with this issue. And if we were able to legalize hemp, this is a product that is good for the environment. It is biodegradable and stuff. It's much better than oil-based plastics, and also it takes compared to some crops, relatively little water to grow. So it's good for the environment in both ways. And we can use this to replace a lot of oil-based plastics. I think we really need to start campaigning our farmers to start growing this crop if they cannot make the money they need with the crops they're currently growing. I think that would be a great way. And also, I'm not against the idea of sending Kansas out to the world and trying to negotiate a separate deal besides what the federal government is doing. I don't know exactly how this would work legally, but I think we need to try to consider what if we could get a deal with we could just do a deal with China, with the state of Kansas, so we could continue to export and import at reasonable rates.
Thanks. Josh.
So I'm a believer in a bold future for agriculture. I served as vice president of the Land Institute based in Salina. That being said, on my own farm, and I actually grow some of the kernza, which is their principal crop that they've developed there for the Land Institute on my farm. However, my principal crops are wheat, sorghum, and I have a cow-calf operation, so beef. So this is very personal to me. Beef is the #1 ag export for the state of Kansas. Wheat, of course, is something culturally very important to the state and important in terms of receipts. And then sorghum, we produce and grow more sorghum than any other state in the country, and it is now threatened with a 179% tariff from China. And sorghum ranks so low in the pantheon of crops that the federal government's not even showing any concern about it. The state of Kansas and ag producers are open to listening to a Democrat on these issues because they're being kicked so hard by a president that doesn't seem to care or know. But that candidate, that Democrat, has to speak with conviction. They have to speak with authenticity. They have to be someone that served as Secretary of Agriculture, so that when they go into Western Kansas, they say, I trust this person, and I know that his passion and his concern is real about this, because this is a huge part of the state's economy, and we are watching it being threatened every single day by a president and apparently a Congress that is not interested in holding him in check.
For 30 seconds.
Well, I think that during my time as mayor of the city of Wichita, we were having issues with beef, and China was not buying our beef. And I personally went around to the different rural communities, talked with those different individuals, and then went to China and met with them to get them back on board in purchasing our beef. It's going to require, you're not going to get the president to listen to us. We know this. So that means that whoever's the governor, which I hope is me, I'm going to get off my butt and go over to wherever they need to be able to take care of the people and the families and children in our communities.
Thank you. We're going to start with Jack. How should economic development incentives be used to recruit and retain businesses in Kansas? And what are a few of the most important economic initiatives that the state is currently implementing?
Well, I think the most important thing the state can do to bring businesses to the state of Kansas is to have a robust plan for colleges and for technical schools. If we make sure that every child who has the right credentials to get into college but can't afford it, if you all of a sudden have all of them going to college, or have the people that want to go to technical school, you would see a lot more businesses come to Kansas because you have a lot more qualified people ready to take on those jobs. I also think, I'm not a big fan of tax breaks, as much as some people say they'll bring business in. I think we really do need to make sure that we do not do that. So I really think we have to make sure that we have the right workforce and that we have the right conditions and that we also set the right tone for Kansas and show that Kansas is truly moving towards truly entering the 21st century instead of being culturally back in the 19th.
All right, thank you. We're going to jump over to Dr. Harrison.
Yes, as I said before, the best economic plan really is a good education plan. And one of the things that I would suggest is that we form more partnerships with businesses, particularly for internships and apprenticeships. And we do that through our community colleges or junior colleges and through labor union skilled labor apprenticeship programs. And for example, we could offer young people an education program in a 2-year school. We'll give you 2 years of education. You have to give us 4 years of work back in Kansas. And so we keep the young people here for that amount of time, and they want to leave after that, that's fine. We've benefited from it, and they have benefited from it, and it could be a 1-year program. We do that already in medicine. If we want to have our degree paid for through the public health service, we can do that. A 1 to 2, a 2 to 2, a 2 to 4, depending upon how much they give you. But the thing about it is that if we provide skilled labor, that's the biggest deficiency today, is skilled labor. We provide skilled labor, businesses now have a reason to come, or actually they have a reason to stay. And if we lose that or don't develop that, we're going to lose those businesses regardless what tax incentives or other things we give them, because it's still all about having a skilled labor force present and available to work for them.
All right, thanks. Senator Cohen.
Thank you. I think the first and foremost thing we need to do is to review the tax incentives that we use currently. We have not a clue whether they're working. The only thing we know is that we just have businesses hopping back and forth from the Missouri side to the Kansas side and back again, depending upon who drives them the most. We've got to do something different. We've got to evaluate those programs. I think there may be a very much better way to use those kinds of funds. The thing that I've been saying for a long time is that we shop to death the most creative, dynamic, and successful economic development program we ever had. And that was the development of the Kansas Bioscience Authority. We We did that back in 2004. Within a matter of just a couple of years, Kansas went from nowhere on the radar screen to the 5th fastest growing bioscience industry state in the country. You know, we abandoned that program because we needed that money to pay for the tax cuts. But it is those kinds of things that brought us NBAF, which is a multi-billion-dollar project in Manhattan, and that has spun off a number of startup and entrepreneurial operations in that area, brought great jobs to the area and lots of well-educated, productive folks. We need to go back to those kinds of things that we know work, and we need to review what we're currently doing and stop doing it if it's not working.
Okay, Josh.
I've said starting back in last October, the best economic incentive program the state could do would be reinstating the civil protections for LGBTQ state employees, in part because it's the right thing to do, but also because when we look at why businesses are choosing to relocate and why people are choosing to relocate, they're looking for quality of life. And this state over the last 8 years has continued to put a target on our back as a state that is backward and going downhill. And until we fix that, then all of the fancy tax incentives and programs and mechanisms we can put in place cannot fix the quality of life perception that we have outside of the state of Kansas. Now, in the meantime, we do need to rethink PEAK and STAR bonds and the other programs and machinery that we use as a state to make sure that if we are using Kansas taxpayer dollars, that we are getting what we expect to out of those. Furthermore, I think we should end the border war with Missouri. We are basically swapping jobs back and forth, and as the metropolitan area and the larger Kansas City area grows, that is good. It's good for Missouri, but it's also good for both Johnson and Wyandotte counties. We just need to make sure that we actually have an economic development plan, particularly for eastern Wyandotte County, who deserves to have one and deserves to see the same sort of investment that the rest of that region is having right now. And then finally, I think that we have to invest in our higher education because as I see around the state in rural communities, the best businesses growing are usually entrepreneurial spin-offs of our region's institutions. If we're not funding our higher educational institutions, then we're not going to see those spin-offs.
Thanks.
One of the things we must have is a skilled and educated workforce. And that means that we're going to have to invest in education. But as we start growing businesses and trying to create and getting them to come here, if we don't have those, they're not going to come. And so it's a much better investment by going and doing something of that nature and bringing them here. But not only that, but you take it a step farther and you create an environment that businesses that they come here, that they're saying they're making a commitment to you. Well, lock them in on the commitment, hold them accountable, make them pay their fair share of taxes. But then if you're going to provide them with incentives, they should be providing you with something such as a good wage so that individuals, you don't have to have both families working to be able to make sure that they have, whether it be medical care or dental care and things of that nature, an adequate wage where they don't have to work 80 hours a week just to make a living. And then certainly create an environment where you have accountability that they're doing what they said they were going to do. If they were going to hire 1,000 workers, you should be able to see 1,000 workers. And by doing that, you're going to have to go inside those places and check up on them. And I've learned over the years that by going inside, you have a tendency to make them behave themselves. And if they don't follow through, then give you your money back. And the other thing is making sure that you have clear transparency. We work for you, and we should be providing you with all of the information on everything that's going on with that particular business and what your investment is bringing you back.
Thanks, Carl. Jack, do you want to do a 30-second response?
I think that we ultimately need, when it comes down to all this, I think we really need to make sure that we consider all opinions and that we really do make sure that the state is moving forward and that we really are a state where people want to move to and will move to, and not just people but businesses. I think we have to make sure that Kansas is a culturally acceptable state. Otherwise, the businesses will have no one to work. Will have, if they need to move, then we'll move. So I think we just have to rethink about how the state is operated and just make sure that Kansas is a place where you can find good jobs and where people want to move.
Thank you. We're going to start with Josh for this one. In 2016, Governor Brownback attempted to prevent the use of Medicaid funds for Planned Parenthood, and that encompassed breast cancer screenings. After the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals ruled against the restriction, the state appealed the ruling to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now Anthony Kennedy is retiring, and the future of Roe v. Wade is uncertain, particularly at the state level. So how will you ensure that Kansas women have access to health care?
Sure. I have said along this entire campaign that I would veto any new restrictions to women's reproductive rights. Most of you are probably aware of my time in the legislature. When I was there, I did vote for a bill that would have put in place clinic licensure restrictions, and then another bill that was what they call the Unborn Victims of Violence Act. It was basically talking about that woman that would be 8 months pregnant, killed by a drunk driver, whether or not you could charge that person with a single or a double homicide. However, on this entire campaign, I've said I'd veto any new restriction, and I've still said that with the advent of potentially a justice at the federal level, changing the balance of the U.S. Supreme Court, that I would stand in the way of any new restrictions on women's reproductive rights. And the other thing I want this audience to make sure that you pay close attention to is what I've done over the last 10 years since basically I've been in the legislature. I've married a very progressive woman who has complete control over her own body. And then I've also put on my ticket, and I hope you all have the chance to meet Katrina, a very strong, empowered woman who has complete control over your body. And so all of us are candidates. We can say things, but I think it's important that you pay attention to what each of us does.
Thank you. Jack.
This is a very important issue, and this also is about, this kind of ties back into reception. One thing that I will point out is that when the conservatives say don't fund Planned Parenthood as funding abortion, they're lying. That there is already, no federal money goes towards abortion when they say that they're lying. So we really have to think about when the state government or when the federal government funds Planned Parenthood, they're not funding abortion, they are funding many things such as mammogram screenings and cancer screenings and many things that women need. So we really have to make sure that those are easily accessible and affordable for women, and Planned Parenthood is a great organization, and we will make sure that they have the resources and that they are able to continue to provide the services, and that we make sure, and then I will kind of touch on the abortion issue. I think this is an issue that is touchy for most people, and really the way I see it is we need to make sure there are as few abortions as possible. What we need to make sure is that we reform our foster care and adoption system so women are easily able to give up their children and feel safe doing that, feel that their child will have a good quality of life. And also make sure, if we're talking about raising the minimum wage without, expanding Medicaid, we will make sure that more women will be willing to have their child because they know that there will be social programs and they will be able to make a living and will be able to support that child, same with education. So really to think sure that we have to make sure that we limit the number of abortions by, changing the culture of the state and making it a place where people want to have their children, even if it was an unplanned pregnancy, but also make sure that if they decide to go ahead and have an abortion, that it is a safe procedure and that there is no restriction on it.
Thank you. Member.
Well, I'm trying to find a nice way to say this, but bottom line is none of us have any damn business telling any woman what she needs to do with her body. And I consider that in the same category as a civil rights issue, when you start telling individuals what they can do with themselves. And we've seen for decades that they have not been able to get it right. We should do everything in our power to make sure that each and every person can get the health care, whether it be preventive or whether it's been extensive, that they need. And we should go out of our way to be able to do it. That's as equally important as a quality of life issue. And so I'm one of those individuals myself, and not only that, but Chris Morrow over here, my lieutenant governor, we have been guessing up on this and just coming up on it today, where 2 years ago or 3 years ago, we saw it from one perspective. We have been pro-choice, and we will always be pro-choice. And if one of us is missing, we'll still have pro-choice in protecting women's rights.
Well, I actually do take care of a number of women in my practice on a regular basis, and many of them are, of course, with Medicaid. And I went down and I spent some time with Planned Parenthood as well, so I do know what's going on there. I do refer women to Planned Parenthood. I refer them to the local community health center, and I refer them to wherever it is that they feel they need to go, and sometimes they don't know, so I will help them as far as those decisions are being made. And I do a lot of hormone replacement therapy in my practice, bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, that is. And I understand from a physician's perspective of the importance of allowing women their choice. And we see kind of that culture, unfortunately, in this state and some other states, exactly as my colleague here said, that it's really a human rights issue. And it's about an issue of not feeling that women should have the right to even vote, maybe. Because we do have some religious sects where that still occurs in this state. And so that kind of carries through with that belief that, well, the woman, she really isn't entitled to any of those decisions. She is, absolutely, and we need to make sure that happens, and I will as governor, and certainly as a physician, I do.
Thank you. Senator Kelly.
Thank you. The retirement of Justice Kennedy, I think, makes it even more imperative that we put a person in the governor's office who has a strong, consistent record of supporting women's rights, particularly women's reproductive rights. We know that it is very likely that the Supreme Court will overturn Roe v. Wade, and that issue will come back to the states, and we need to have somebody who is no nonsense, not wishy-washy a bit about that issue in the governor's office. Mr. Swati has not voted just once or twice to restrict access to abortion for women. He's voted 11 times to do that, and then followed that up with overrides of Governor Sebelius's vetoes of that action, promising to not veto or to veto any further restrictions is a very hollow promise. It would be like me promising you that I won't make the foster care system any worse than it is now. That's not what we need. Somebody who's going to work proactively on behalf of women in the state of Kansas.
Actually, Senator Kelly, it would kind of be like you saying that we have to stand up to Chris Kobach, even though you voted for his Voter Registration Safe Act, which put in place so many of the voter suppression problems we're dealing with now. And that's why I said earlier, words are words, and we're all candidates out here, and we know how to use words, but you have to look at what I am doing as a person.
Thank you. We'll start with Arden. After the legislature repealed Brownback's tax cuts in the 2017 session, the state's fiscal health improved drastically. However, our reserves have been depleted. More money will be required for K-12 education. Hundreds of millions of dollars are still being swept from the state highway fund to balance the budget, and KPERS has a huge unfunded liability. So, as governor, how will you address these problems and work toward a more balanced budget?
That's a very good question, and I wish I had a crystal ball here that I could say how we're going to solve all those problems. It's a problem that is not just the state of Kansas. Pretty much every state is having to ask that question. And the thing about it is we need a cultural change, because the current culture is that, well, gee, we'll just spend the money either way, and if we have a little excess, we'll give it back, and we'll just borrow more money. And that still is the majority right now in the Kansas legislature. And what we have to do is recognize that there are other options as far as getting money back into the state. One, of course, and I know Jack has championed this whole time, and that is we do need to have a medical marijuana law. We need to reverse where some of that money is going. We need to bring money in rather than kicking it out. Is it a panacea? Absolutely not. But it is a component. In addition, we need to promote more tourism in the state in order to get more money coming in from outside. We also need a better education bill so that we fully get our companies running on overdrive. In other words, if we get more high-paying labor, which is skilled labor, that generates more income in the state. And that's primarily union jobs that are going to do that. And that helps us increase the revenue overall. That's a beginning, at least, in order to start looking at how do we gain enough money in order to take care of our expenses.
All right, thank you. Carl.
Well, Arden is correct on those items there. Start looking at legalizing marijuana and taxing it, and then industrial hemp and medical marijuana. Those are things we've already seen someone else's best practice to the west of us in the state of Kansas, how successful it was. And so it's something that we need, and we need to start looking at diversifying what we actually have, diversifying our economy here. We need to take a real serious look at wind energy and solar energy and other different types of technologies. What other countries are doing well? Bring those best practices here to the state of Kansas and apply them, and not be afraid of change, rather than doing what we've been doing for the past 75 years and thinking that it's going to make it better, because we know it's not, and we know that we're going to run into a recession, and every 5 to 6 years we have a recession. So we need to start diversifying what we actually have, and diversifying what in the ag industry, and start coming up with something other than just the taxing of the agriculture and manufacturing, and also the tax base, and eventually working ourselves into where we're freeing up, where we're not paying taxes on foods, and individuals can do a better job, and they can use the revenue that they have to be able to take care of their families. Does that make it?
Oh yeah, time's fair. All right, Jeff,
It's not just the solvency of capers. I'm lucky. My two oldest kids here this evening, Jackson and Mariner. They can wave. Jackson, my oldest, he will be older than I am now. By the time this state pays off its bonded indebtedness that's been run up in the last 8 years. That is shameful. So the next administration already knows, before we get there, that it's not going to be very fun, because any additional revenue that we bring in that was unanticipated, any money that comes in from an improving economy, is virtually spoken for, dealing with the financial mismanagement that we've had over the last 8 years. And so it's, when we look as an incoming administration, it's not just the solvency of capers. We have to address the chronic underfunding of state agencies across the board. Do you know that there's a 20-day waiting period on mental health services and getting into a bed at Osawatomie State Hospital? So our law enforcement officials, our individuals, our families in crisis, they have nowhere to go when they are having a family crisis. The state has to address that, on top of addressing transportation, on top of addressing K through 12. The list is incredibly long, and it's going to take an administration that can work with the legislature and rally the state to fix the huge mess that we have.
thank you, Senator Cummings.
Actually, we have done some things that I think will improve the solvency of capers. This year, we did borrow $194 million from capers to pay some bills, but we have started the process of paying that back, and we'll have that done by the end of next year. Then we just need to continue to make our employer contribution at the actual required level. But we did, several years ago, put together a system that would have us 100% solvent by 2033. So if we follow through on our pledge, we can get there, and I think we'll be okay. What we've got to do, though, in this state is start reinvesting in the kinds of things that we know are the real economic drivers. We've talked about some of them tonight. We've got to reinvest in our school system. That's the biggest economic driver on our entire state. We've got to start reinvesting in our infrastructure, whether we're talking our roads or we're talking digital. We've got to do that kind of thing. And we've got to expand Medicaid, which will not only provide the healthcare services to those folks, but it will greatly expand our economy and grow good jobs. So we've got to do these kinds of things. We've got to take a look at things like the Bioscience Authority structure and see if we can put those kinds of things back in place. And then, yes, we've got to rebrand Kansas and make this an attractive place for people to want to live, work, and play.
Thanks. Now we'll jump all the way to Jeff.
I think, yes, we have to do everything within our power to make sure that capers and every other department in the state government is well accounted, has the money they need to provide what they need to. And capers is especially important because, you talk about education. We want to make sure that teachers teach in Kansas, and if they don't feel that the retirement will be there for them, they will not stay in Kansas. So to make sure that capers is solvent. And so what we talked about, doing such things as, marijuana, hemp, increasing tourism, all these things that will help bring in more money to the state. And I think really it's just about drumming those things up, making sure that we have a more robust economy, making sure that people, and also one more thing about raising the economy is it needs to be easier to start a small business in Kansas. My family started a small business about 7 years ago, and what it took to do all the state paperwork was ridiculous. It should be much easier. we were average people, and it took a lot of work. It should be fairly easy, because a lot of people have great ideas, and they have a concept, and they're ready to go to work, but they may not have what they need to they may not be able to afford lawyers and stuff to be able to get their business off the ground. And we have to make sure that to create a Kansas economy where we will have more money in the state, we have to make sure that people are able to start their small businesses and people are able to contribute to the Kansas economy.
Thanks. Arden, you have 30 seconds.
Yes, we really need to address the fraud and waste in the government. We need to diversify agriculture so that we actually increase our #1 income activity in the state. In addition to that, we need to make sure that we better use, for example, the Medicaid funds. But the biggest hurdle we have to overcome is really the Senate Oversight Committee, because every one of them is paid by the insurance companies as far as their campaigns. You need to get out relative to your people, your representatives, and that's the only way we're going to stop that.
All right, thank you. So for the last question, we're going to do something slightly different. Each candidate will get 2 minutes to respond. We're going to start with Josh and just work our way down. At this stage in the campaign, it's vital for voters to understand the differences between the candidates. Please highlight 2 or 3 areas where you diverge from the other candidates, and please be specific. Don't just talk about your temperament or how hard you work for Kansans. Cite specific distinctions on policy, your record, etc.
So I work hard for Kansans and I have the right temperament. One difference, I stand up. And as a candidate, this makes a difference. Particularly those of you that are Shawnee County Democrats, this makes a difference. Because you know what? There are some slight differences between all of us. But the big difference and the big problem Democrats have had is who can actually win a general election in November, and that matters. And we were already making jokes about the .50 caliber in the back of the Jeep, so we know how much it matters this year. It's not funny. It's not something we can be trifled with. We have to make sure we win, and guess what? In 2014, we had a great candidate. He raised a bunch of money. He was backed by all the establishment. We won 7 counties. 7. The furthest west was Riley. If we're not competing in western Kansas, we will lose again. My family's been here since 1864. They've been farming in Ellsworth County all that time. I have family on my dad's side alone in 34 Kansas counties. That's a difference. We have a network all over the state, and if you think that doesn't matter, go into a rural community. Go into Johnson County, where my wife's from. Third-party validation is how candidates win in this state. Also, being able to generate excitement and enthusiasm to get people out. Our campaign does that because myself and my running mate, Katrina Lewison, who is a West Point graduate, flew Black Hawk helicopters in the Iraq War and is a Purple Heart recipient, represent the future of the state of Kansas. And Kansans are ready for something positive, something exciting, something that makes them optimistic about the future, because it's our optimism, it's our Kansas optimism that has driven us for over 150 years. And so what I want you to walk out, if you remember, is that in terms of the difference in these candidates, the Josh Swatty and Katrina Lewison ticket represents the Democrats' greatest chance at rallying this state to fix all that has happened in the last 8 years in a way that's unifying, in a way that's forward, in a way that's exciting, in a way that's optimistic, so that we can all be proud to be Kansas once again.
Thank you.
That I'm different than my other candidates, that makes me the best choice for the Democrats and for the state of Kansas. I am the only candidate that has publicly come out and said, I do not take corporate money, and I do not take donations over $500. I only take money in small amounts from working people all across the state, and so when I'm elected governor, I am only responsible to the people. I will not be responsible to the big donors and to the billionaires, and I will be, when I'm elected, the only one I respond to is all of you. Also, on the issue of marijuana, I've heard some other candidates bring it up. I was the first candidate to really bring this up as a major issue and start pounding it all across the state. And I've heard everyone that I've talked to across the state, whether it be Democrats, Republicans, or Independents, say, yes, we need that. So I really think that I was the first to come out with the issue, and I needed it, and I'm going to take credit for that. At least I think raising the minimum wage. I'm the only candidate that has pounded raising the minimum wage to a living wage. It is a crime that people work 40 hours a week, and yet they live in poverty. This bothers me, and it's one of the reasons why I got into this race. In my opinion, and when I'm governor, there will be no one that works 40 hours a week and lives in poverty. not only just them, you're thinking about the children and what that means they go through. And we will make sure that no one has to do that in my Kansas. Also, I'm the only candidate that has a plan for eliminating the sales tax on food. Yes, others may say it, but what I do, what my administration will do, is we will eliminate the sales tax on food, but we will also create a luxury goods tax. So those at the top will pay a little bit extra for things they don't necessarily need, but that money will go to fill the hole that was being brought in by the sales tax on food, so that those who need every penny for groceries have every penny they need to provide for their families. Thank you, and I hope for you vote for Jack Ferguson and Alexander Klein on August 7th. Polls are open 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. Make sure you get out and vote. Get your friends and family out to vote. It's the only way we're going to take this party and state back.
I want to take the opportunity to thank you for hosting this event today. And I know and you know that there's only real one true candidate up here. And when we start talking about bringing about change here in the state of Kansas, you start looking at me, there's a big difference here. And so, but the other portion is that one, I started out as a grassroots individual and worked my way up and got into politics and then managed the largest city in the state of Kansas with a $600 million budget. I started out in the military as a private and worked my way up, went to officer candidate school, and actually worked on general staff and trained a lot of soldiers to go to combat. I can tell you anything you want to know pretty much about weapons. And then so I go to corporate America. I started out as a sheet metal assembler, just working to make sure that I could take care of my family. And I had 4 children at that time, and it was extremely difficult for my wife and I. And I worked my way up to become an executive. I'm the proven example that you can start at the very bottom and you can work your way up. But as mayor of the city of Wichita, I've seen how some of the horrible, piss-poor things, legislative, that actually came down, whether it was intended or unintended, affected our families. And I was the one that was sitting there with families, whether it be in Wichita or whether it be in rural Kansas, and working with them on how to resolve this and how we're going to get through this. Each and every one of you, I have walked in your footsteps. I have felt your pain. And not everybody can tell you that because they've been doing well for themselves. The thing is you need somebody, it's about Kansas and what we can do and we can bring about change. We must have inclusion because we don't have inclusion here in the state of Kansas. We must bring everybody together and that's one of the things that I'm good at. And as you all know, Wichita is a very, very conservative community. I'm the only one that has a track record, and a proven track record that you can measure it and you can go count on it, that I've had a 90th percentile in bringing Republicans, Independents, and Democrats together to work in the best interest of our families and our communities.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. And I picked up this afternoon the Kansas Democratic Party platform. And I looked through the various different areas on that platform. And one of the reasons that I'm running is because I've practiced medicine through 4 presidents and a number of governors. And I hear all the time about how we're going to fix this and we're going to fix that. And I certainly do appreciate the mental health folks. As a family doc, I'm supposed to supervise what goes on with that and make sure that it is actually working. The family doc is the one who takes care of things. I'm the one who actually see patients in the office. And healthcare is the #1 issue in the United States today. It is something we have to overhaul. Just throwing more money at it doesn't work. We already spend more money than any other country in the world. And we have one of the poorest health outcomes of the developed world. We have to change it. And I've heard politicians cheerlead and all kinds of things, but they don't actually know medicine. That is the most important thing we have. I've also been in the classroom. I'm a former teacher. I did that before I went to medical school. Did a few things before I went to medical school at age 34. I'm also a colonel in the Air Force. I know how to bring things together. I know how to complete a mission. I also understand agriculture and how agriculture correlates to human health and how we actually solve the environmental issues, and at the same time, we increase agricultural outcome and production and profitability. and soil water holding capacity. So things like the drought out here don't give us a big deal. Also, I know how to make Kansas carbon neutral in 5 years. Please see my website, anderson2018.com. You can read more about these issues. I've also published a number of books if you wish to read about that. I know how to solve these problems. Thank you very much.
Just turn my mic off. I was going to stay seated, so that could be one difference. But I hate to state the obvious, but I am the only woman running for governor this year. That's a little obvious. But I'm also the only one up here who has been in the trenches for the past 8 years, fighting like the devil against the Brownback Collier agenda. You know, when Sam Brownback made the largest cuts in state history to our schools, I fought back. I knew our kids deserved better. I knew our teachers deserved better. So I fought for full funding of those schools. You know, when I watched Brownback and Collier push higher property taxes and higher sales taxes on Kansans, I fought back. I led the bipartisan effort to overturn Sam Brownback's tax experiment. We were successful. You know, I can win this election. I've won 4 state Senate elections in a very Republican district. I've got some of my red state folks right down here who live out in Muncie County and know how hard that was to do. I can do it. I have done it. I have built a coalition of Democrats, independents, and moderates, both in the state legislature and outside the state legislature. When it comes time in the general, and I don't care if it's Chris Kobach or if it's Jeff Collier, those moderate Republicans will be coming over to my camp to vote for me. They know me, they trust me, and they're looking forward to working with me. And they know that from day one when I get in that governor's office, that I'll work with them to solve the problems of the state of Kansas.
All right, that concludes a robust debate. It's been wonderful, hasn't it? Let's give the candidates a hand. Also, we're going to